The sound of metal doors clanking shut echoed down the dimly lit hall as two officers escorted Orson into separate interrogation rooms. The stale air of the police station carried a sense of finality. He had been taken from prison, where he was held as suspects in the murder of a man who had died under mysterious circumstances. Orson sat silently, nerves on edge, knowing that this was more than just a simple murder case. The detectives were piecing together something much larger. Across the room, Colonel Alfie, a seasoned detective with years of experience under his belt, reviewed the files in front of him. The murder investigation had led to a surprising discovery. The prisoner, along with Zara, a woman in her 50s, were involved in a massive gold theft in Chennai months before. The man who had died, it seemed, was simply collateral damage in a much darker plot. Alfie had been hunting the notorious gold thieves for nearly a year. He'd heard whispers of a string of burglaries, but the criminals had been too careful, too elusive. Now, with these three in custody, he was determined to uncover the full story. The story of the robbery began nearly a year ago. Orson, young and desperate, had been living on the edge for as long as he could remember. His mother had left when he was young, and his father was a ghost, in and out of his life, with no real concern for his well-being. He met Zara through a mutual friend, a woman in her 50s who had become infamous for her involvement in petty crimes around the city. But Orson saw something in Zara that he hadn't seen in anyone else. A way out. She had connections, a sharp mind for planning, and most importantly, the ability to make things happen. It was Zara who suggested the gold heist. She knew an old woman living alone in a crumbling mansion at the edge of Chennai. The woman had inherited a fortune of gold from her late husband, but she was reclusive, rarely leaving the house except for occasional visits to her daughter. Zara had been visiting the woman under the guise of proposing marriage between the old woman's daughter and a mutual acquaintance. It was the perfect setup. No one would suspect a friendly guest. Orson was reluctant at first, unsure if this was the right path. But Hope, his aunt and partner in crime, convinced him that this was their chance to escape the drudgery of their lives. Together, they devised a plan that seemed foolproof. The night of the robbery was like any other warm, humid evening in Chennai. Orson left the old woman's house after dinner, claiming he was going out to pick up dessert for everyone. The truth was far more sinister. He first went to a local pharmacy, his face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and bought sleeping pills. Then Orson went to a nearby market, where he bought juice and returned to the house with smiles on his faces. The old woman welcomed him back with open arms, unaware that the drinks he brought were laced with enough sedatives to knock her out for hours. After the old woman and her servants fell into a deep sleep, Orson waited, watching the clock tick slowly. At 6 a.m., he slipped into the old woman's room. The shadows of dawn filtered through the window as he stood over her bed, his heart racing. He had never done something like this before, but Zara had trained him well. No hesitation, no second thoughts. As Orson leaned down to cut the gold rings from the old woman's fingers, her eyes shot open. She gasped, but Orson acted quickly, clamping his hand over her mouth. In a panic, Zara ran into the room. Pulling an electrical cord from the wall, she wrapped it around the old woman's throat, tightening it just enough to keep her from screaming. In the dim light, Orson watched as Zara sliced the gold from the woman's body. 7 rings, a necklace, 3 pairs of earrings. The room seemed to hold its breath as they worked in silence. They left before anyone could suspect, taking a taxi to Basti where they sold the gold quickly and rented a new hideout. Meanwhile, Zara sat in the interrogation room, her hands trembling. She hadn't planned on this. All she wanted was to help Orson make some money, but things had spiraled out of control. Zara knew she wasn't completely innocent, but she hadn't been the mastermind behind the murder. That was all Orson. She had just been along for the ride. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible as she spoke to the case officer. "I didn't know about the murder. I thought it was just a robbery." But the more Zara talked, the more detectives realized that she was deeply entangled in the crime. Not only had she helped Orson plan the heist, but she had also been instrumental in selling the gold to a local dealer. Zara had ties to the underworld of Chennai, and her web of connections ran deeper than anyone suspected. As Colonel Alfie and his team dug deeper into the investigation, they uncovered more than they bargained for. The gold robbery was just one of many crimes committed by Orson and Zara. Over the past year, they had been involved in a series of burglaries, fencing stolen goods through a network of dealers and criminals. Each theft had been meticulously planned, but their greed had finally caught up with them. What made this case even more complex was the personal history between the criminals. Orson had been abandoned by his mother, and it was only recently that he discovered she was involved in the gold theft ring. The revelation shattered him, but it also pushed him deeper into a life of crime, desperate for approval from the woman who had left him behind. Zara, on the other hand, had always been the driving force behind her criminal activities. She had a knack for manipulation, convincing Orson to follow her lead no matter the cost. But now, sitting in a cold interrogation room, she realized that her time was running out. With each new revelation, the detectives expanded their investigation, unearthing other crimes linked to the trio. The gold dealer who had helped fence the stolen items was arrested, and soon, more members of the criminal network began to fall. But Orson and Zara remained at the center of it all, each trying to shift the blame onto the others. Colonel Alfie knew this case was far from over. There were still too many unanswered questions. Who had orchestrated the murder? Was there a larger criminal syndicate involved? And what role did Orson's mother play in all of this? As the weeks passed, tensions between the two criminals reached a boiling point. Orson, desperate to save himself, began cooperating with the police, revealing details about the heist and the gold theft ring. But in doing so, he also exposed Zara's involvement in the murder. Zara, realizing that Orson had turned on her, decided to strike back. She claimed that Orson had been the one to kill the old woman during the robbery, and that she had only been a bystander. She remained silent, knowing that any word she said could further incriminate her. But it was too late. The detectives had pieced together enough evidence to charge all two with murder, robbery, and a host of other crimes. Their empire of lies had crumbled, leaving them to face the consequences of their greed. Months after the trial, the city of Chennai was still reeling from the revelations of the gold theft ring. Orson and Zara had been sentenced to life in prison, but the investigation into their crimes continued. Colonel Alfie, now a celebrated figure in the police department, remained vigilant, knowing that there were still others out there, people who had escaped justice. As for Orson, he spent his days in a cold, gray cell, haunted by the choices he had made. The gold, once a symbol of his freedom, had become his curse, and now, with nothing left but time, he could only wonder how things might have been different.